Coming up on today's episode of The Health Review.
If we have shame, which most of us do, we pass it on. The shame that we pass on comes out in our judgments of other people. If I make a judgment about someone, it's usually something I don't want to look at in myself. And the difference with RLT to most other therapies is that we do the trauma work with the individual in front of the partner. So it's part of the couple's work, which is so powerful. If you can really, really pierce each other's wounds, and most people do, then you can start to heal together in relationship.
Hello, welcome back to The Health Review. Thank you for joining us once again. And I am thrilled to be discussing something which I hope you're all going to really love hearing about today. It's a topic that so many of us can quietly wrestle with inside, about why we struggle to feel secure both in ourselves but also in relationships, and how we can finally start to heal some of these core wounds inside of us. Very excited for today's guest. Our guest today is Victoria Shalet, an accredited humanistic psychotherapist and certified relational life therapist who works with individuals and couples to untangle childhood wounds, repair relationship ruptures, and build deeper self-worth. Victoria, thank you for coming on The Health Review.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I've got to say first, some people watching may recognise your face. I just wanted to say it before we get into your expertise now. But you were a child actor.
I was.
I remember watching you on The Queen's Nose, which was it a CBBC programme?
Yeah, it was.
It was. You were very famous as a child, which you've done a big sort of pivot in your career now. What made you kind of make that turn?
I think I was I feel quite lucky to have had two careers so far. I started working when I was 6 and I got to my late 20s. So I'd had over 20 years in an industry that I hadn't necessarily chosen from an adult perspective. And I felt like I'd outgrown it. And I'd done some therapy myself in my early 20s and it really changed my view. I'd done psychology at A-level and it really appealed to me. And I'd spent a lot of time, we were talking before about how as a child actor on a film set particularly, you are thrown into a very adult environment where you start watching how people interact and people don't see you observing. So I think I've been doing that all my life. So it really appealed to me to work out why we do the things we do and how we can be more relational.
Which would have made you a good actor as well. That's really interesting actually thinking about it, because you've got to be really observant as an actor anyway. And I think having that, I guess, within you at such a young age clearly shows that you were meant to be doing what you're doing now as well. And it's funny how the two, I guess, are kind of linked in some way.
Yeah, I think some people think it's quite a big leap. And actually, when you frame it like that and you think about the best actors, I'm definitely not suggesting I was the best actor. I'm pretty sure I wasn't. But more that what I did learn to do was listen and observe and respond rather than to just react. And I think that's what good actors do.
Yeah, and definitely good therapists as well. So as I mentioned, you do relational life therapy. Lots of people won't actually know what that is. What is it?
Relational Life Therapy was developed by a therapist and author called Terry Real in the States, who is becoming more well-known here. For a long time, he wasn't. And I came to him about 10 years ago, and I was doing a training with Esther Perel and him. And at that point, I was really interested in Esther Perel. I wanted to go and train with her. And she was writing The State of Affairs, and she wasn't training anymore. And I had never heard of Terry, and I really liked his kind of direct and empathetic and compassionate demeanor and the way he worked. And it suddenly clicked. I thought, this is kind of how I was trained, but it's more depth and it's specific to couples. Because I was working with individuals. I trained to work with individuals and then did some training with couples. And I was often talking to individuals who were in relationship, and I kept thinking, if your partner was here, we could expedite this. We could actually hear what they were saying, and I could move this through a little bit quicker. So I really wanted some in-depth relational couples training, really. And so what RLT is, Relational Life Therapy, is a model that kind of really, really starts to name the kind of dynamic that happens, that occurs between a couple. And you start to name the dynamic, and then you realize that it's not the people, but it's just the dynamic that often gets in the way. And then what happens is once you've kind of established that, you start to realize, well, where did that dynamic originate? How did you learn to do that? Why are you showing up? Where's that reaction coming from? What's behind the reaction? And then you start to do kind of deep kind of trauma work that often shows up. And the difference with RLT to most other therapies is that we do the trauma work with the individual in front of the partner. So it's part of the couple's work, which is so powerful. And it just elicits compassion and empathy that you don't get in the same way if you kind of report your trauma therapy to your partner. So doing that work in the room is really a huge aspect of RLT. And then the next part, once we've gone through that part, we teach skills. So I will teach you skills of how to relate better in a more relational way. RLT is really focused on the kind of relational empowerment rather than individual empowerment, which is what we've kind of, I think there's a kind of movement from the individual to the relational piece, certainly in the therapeutic world, because for so long it's been really about independence and individuals and really supporting the kind of speaking truth to power. But that's all well and good if the other one is powerful. How do you address the powerful one? And that's another kind of really important part of RLT, which is a lot of therapies will talk about how to support one person to speak up, to find their voice, right? We're all told, let's find our voice. And that's great, but there's often one who already has a voice. And we call that the grandiose partner, the one who's kind of thinks they're better than. Not necessarily in a kind of conscious way, but their behavior shows up like that. And so that grandiosity doesn't usually get addressed in therapy. And that's what Terry teaches. And he taught me to do, which is to kind of call that out with love and teach that person to kind of come back to a healthy relational space, and teach the person in the kind of what we call the shame down position to come up to health too. So you have the kind of grandiose and the shame based, and then we meet in the middle, and that's how you can have a relationship, because you can't be relational from a one up or a one down.
Wow, it's so crazy how most people do get into these dynamics subconsciously without knowing over time. And if you're in a long-term partnership or a marriage, these dynamics can go on for years and years and potentially get worse and worse unless you are able to either do your therapy individually and work through it as a couple, or go to some kind of couples therapy. It sounds so interesting. I've never heard of the concept of bringing your traumas in that way with a therapist up with the other person there, because I'm guessing it might lead to a bit of extra compassion from the other person.
Totally. If
you can actually see what core wound is there, and it can be from childhood. For a lot of people, it's very young stuff. I think if you're a nice, well-rounded person, you will feel a lot of compassion for your partner in those moments. But also at the same time, it must be a really vulnerable position to be putting yourself in, because sometimes also, maybe I'm generalizing, but I feel like men in particular are quite private about some of their traumas, for instance. And maybe men in particular might find it hard to really relive that in front of not only a therapist, but also your partner.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're not wrong. What I would say is that I just want to caveat this, that we'll only do that work if it is safe for the partnership. So I would never, ever take someone into a traumatic kind of memory or to that space if it is going to be used against them. So I would never, ever put someone in that position. I want to make that really clear. But yes, if it is safe to do so, and it's a staged process. It's not that I go into that in the first session. I hope there will be some trust built up and a space that feels, and also one of the only rules I have in my therapy room is if I ask you a question and you don't want to go there, you say pass, PASS. Like, you don't need to go anywhere. I trust that you're an adult and you are in charge of that. Just because you're in therapy doesn't mean that I am entitled to know everything if you don't feel you want to go there.
What kinds of situations are couples showing up with when they come and see you? Are we talking, I guess, betrayals, long-term dynamics? What sort of things are you seeing?
It's an interesting kind of mix. I seem to see quite a varied number of kind of issues. Betrayal, for sure. It's usually kind of transitional times. So it might be right at the beginning, just getting married, just thinking about how are we going to do this really well. And that's a kind of really intentional piece, which I feel really excited about. Really love helping people at the beginning kind of really get clear. Because I think, marriage is a really big commitment, and we know the divorce rates. And so I think people are more mindful of it. They're more intentional. So there's that. Some people come at that point, or they come when they have a child. So, which is a big, big shift in a relationship. It changes the dynamic overnight. And so that is one of the times. And then I work with people when either they're shifting, kids are leaving home often, someone's retired, someone's parent has died, or there's been a death to the close family. And so there is a lot of, it's usually those transitional points at which the dynamic no longer works. You suddenly feel like this isn't working anymore. And it's because one of you is moving through, growing apart. Lots of things happen around that time. But, and in COVID, the kind of the outside world changes, the rules change, and suddenly the government is saying no for you instead of you. So suddenly everything else comes to the fore because there's an external boundary.
Relational life therapy, it's also a lot about learning to repair, if I'm right, rather than keep repeating the same dynamic. That important part, which I guess sometimes is left out. How do you think that might look in a real life argument between partners? So you've had a real big disagreement. Maybe you're going through this transitional phase and you're not seeing eye to eye. How can you work on that sort of repair part?
I think, well, the therapy kind of process is understanding that we're usually having the same row. It looks different most of the time, but you have a row, and relationships are a series of harmony, disharmony, and repair. But most of us didn't get repair modeled. So a lot of people have the disharmony and then they push it under the carpet and they don't deal with it. Or they just keep having the same row, or they keep coming back. And so what we teach is about what is that touching in you historically? Because the fact that it comes on, so I talk about triggers or activation as kind of, if it comes on really, really fast, if your reaction, that kind of whoosh feeling we talk about in RLT, is it kind of comes on really fast and then you can't stop thinking about it. And it's kind of disproportionate to what just happened. It's not that there's not a grain of truth in that being eliciting a response, but it's bigger than it needed to be. And for me, that always means there's a history to this. Mm-hmm. So once in therapy, we start to understand what's the history behind this, what's that touching, then you can do some of the trauma work, which might evoke some compassion for both of them. And then what starts to happen is you start to realize that I teach you how you can make a different move. Because those reactions come from our kind of amygdala, fight, flight, or freeze, or fix response, right? We learn that very young. We are in threat, and our amygdala comes online so fast, and it takes quite a few more milliseconds for our prefrontal cortex, which is our safe and protected, I'm regulated brain, to come online. And if you react from that amygdala part, you are gone. Like there's no adult part of you there in that moment. So what we teach is to learn about how to inhibit the whoosh. And then you're not going to have the same row again, but then you're going to learn how to speak to each other and learn how to communicate and repair. This is what came up for me. So there's a tool that we teach called the feedback wheel, which might be, when you did this, I saw this happen. And what I made up about it was this. And then I felt this. What I'd really like in future is this. So it's kind of both acknowledging I made up a story that I'm now reacting to based in some truth that we can objectively agree happened. but I'm now also thinking about moving forward. And then it's up to the other to not defend, but really hear, take it in, and kind of use that as data. Do I want to have this row again, or could I sidestep that? Could I do something else?
What's interesting is when you say about the prefrontal, the part of our brain there, that's the bit that we know now that, you know, people who have ADHD and actually we think neurologists and therapists think that actually there are a lot more people have some of these neurodivergent conditions than we once knew about. The things we're doing in our lifestyle, phones, you know, we are actually dysregulating that part of our brain, which is what would bring in the kind of rationality and the moments of calm. And we're kind of disturbing that flow a little bit with all of the stimulus and things going on, which probably makes some of this stuff even harder.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting that Gabor Mate, everyone probably knows that name. He's obviously been, is he in his 80s? He's quite,
Not sure how.
even he said in an interview recently that he still gets triggered and goes back into that child place.
Yeah,
the child wound.
Always. And I did his training actually, and I watched him get triggered. But what he's really good at, and what anyone who's doing, quote unquote, the work, is that it's not that you're never going to get triggered again. It's you get triggered and you recover quicker and you are able to repair and own it. And that's what I've certainly seen him do. But I think I'm never going to suggest, I certainly still get, I really don't like the word triggered, but I certainly still get activated a lot. What I'm much quicker at is catching it. And my original training was Gestalt, but also formative psychology, which is the work of Stanley Kellerman, who's little known, but absolutely fundamental to the way I work, because it is about the body. It's about how we hold it in our body, how we create and form our body in relation to people. And so when you get to know how you hold certain feelings and where they are in your body, you are in charge of undoing it. So I'm just quicker, not better, not fixed, but just quicker at understanding where that's come from, what I'm reacting to, how I can undo it and do something different next time.
And I guess the understanding is a part of the puzzle that sort of gives you that peace element in a way, because if you understand yourself a bit better and you understand there was this thing that happened to me or multiple things that happened around this time, that sometimes makes you a bit more compassionate towards yourself. Like there is a reason why this is coming up, not just that I'm unhinged or I'm crazy or whatever it is. But I guess part of finding that trauma is about remembering the things that might be traumatic. And I know that there are people who suppress, block things. Lots of us do it. We have to for survival reasons. Could be at any point in your life. We sometimes have to suppress these traumas, especially when you're children. Is a part of it, I guess, accessing some of these moments or knowing what could be the trigger, because I guess it's all very well and good, you know, trying to acknowledge I'm being triggered in a relationship. This thing that you're doing is upsetting me and I'm turning into this toddler or I'm having a tantrum. But if you don't know what the trauma was, is it difficult to really work through it?
Yeah, and sometimes you won't know what it is. And I can go searching with you, but in the end, if it's not very clear, I don't want to plant a seed that may not actually have been there. You know, I can't know. I wasn't there. And what we do know is that our body remembers. We just don't recall it. And so that's where it shows up in our reactions. So in relationship, unconsciously, the trauma shows up in how we react, in how we relate to people. There was some interruption to the connection being safe, or there was some interruption to it being consistent, therefore safe. Our body remembers for us. The body keeps the score, as Bessel talks about.
And I guess a lot of us also have these subconscious dynamics going on. We look at examples from around us when we were young. I know a lot of people grow up and don't want to repeat the mistakes that were made, but subconsciously they start repeating them even if they try really hard not to. There are people who grew up with alcoholic parents who swear they would never be an alcoholic and then they become an alcoholic. How can we work on that? Because that is something that I think a lot of people grapple with.
Yeah, I mean, most of us will say, I want to do it completely differently. Be that relationships, parenting, marriage, and the intention is there. And I think that that's all well and good. But as I said, so much of what is communicated to us is nonverbal. So we can teach I find it find myself doing this. I can tell my son to do something or not to do something whilst doing the very thing I'm saying don't do. So, it's this argument about screen time, which might be we can only tell our children not to use screens and really expect that they'll listen if we don't do the same thing. So, our actions speak louder than words. So the same went for our parents before, that we just grew up with that, or our caregivers. We grew up seeing it. And that goes in really, really, it's a cellular change that happens. And you can't know. You have to actually intentionally do something different. And those kind of learnt responses feel normal until you get into a relationship with someone else and it was complete. They do it so differently. And then it's kind of, you might defend it, you might think it's normal, or then you feel deep shame about it.
Wow. I'd love to get onto shame in a little while. Something that's coming up a lot, and I think a lot of people didn't realise that they were feeling shame. And it's one of those weird things where it's hard to really know what shame is. And actually, let's talk about it now. What is shame? Where does it come from? And how do you know, like, what's the emotion? How do you feel when you're feeling shame?
I think shame is one of the hardest things to feel. I think it's, we can be shamed about pretty much anything. And what it does is it teaches us to kind of hide. On a kind of very simple level, shame is, this isn't okay. So shame is different from guilt. So guilt, and Brené Brown's the kind of guru on kind of defining that, the difference of guilt being I did something wrong versus I am wrong. I mean, there's an absolutely brilliant book called Shame, The Path Out of Help by Carolyn Cowan, which I cannot recommend enough. And she really, really goes into detail with this. Hugely confronting and really, really powerful. And it shows up in our responses, is what I see in therapeutic. In my clinical practice, I see shame show up daily in our defenses or our reactions.
That's interesting. And where would it originate from? When we're children, you're told
anything. You can be, I think feeds into this idea that people think they're too much or they're not enough. It's the way we talk to children, the way we talk about ourselves. You might have had a parent who was constantly on a diet, who was constantly commenting on their body size, their body image, which will impact how children look at themselves and then start to relate to food or to clothes or to self-image. Mm-hmm. You could grow up with, let's talk about super academic parents, and you struggle. That feels like I'm not lovable if I'm not as good as mum and dad in this area. A teacher can shame you inadvertently. I think what happens is, and I'm not the expert on this, but I think what happens is we hear something and then we make it mean something about ourselves as children. Because if it's someone we care about, or a group, let's say, we care about, so a friendship group at school, and someone teases us and we make it mean that we aren't enough, or that we're threatened in some way, then we learn how to adapt, because it's a survival skill, right? And that's what people-pleasing is, and it's also what bullying is. Because a bully will also, they either watch someone do it, someone did it to them and they thought, right, well, when I grow up, I'll be like that. Or they were allowed to do it to someone else and no one stopped them. Mm. And so bullies don't just happen. There is a kind of, there's shame in there. The shame that they weren't stopped, the shame that someone did it around them or to them and no one stopped them. It's when we don't have someone to validate the experience we've gone through and we've just internalized the experience. And it's usually very, very young.
Recognizing it as an adult is something that can be quite challenging. Is it that sort of negative voice in your head? Do you think that could be linked to the shame emotion? So something saying, oh, you really messed that up, you shouldn't have done that, like you need to be better, and that kind of tough voice that a lot of us have.
The perfectionist voice, definitely. The people pleaser voice, it is definitely a voice in our head, for sure. And what Carolyn says in that book is that it's, you know, if we have shame, which most of us do, we pass it on.
Oh,
We just keep passing it on.
I need to read this book.
It's pretty confronting and brilliant, but it's the shame that we pass on comes out in our judgments of other people. If I make a judgment about someone, and Gabor talks about this too, it's usually something I don't want to look at in myself. And so I've shamed myself for that, and now I'm not going to do that. So I need to be better than. In that moment, we all, and let's face it, I don't know anyone who doesn't know this experience of you're talking to someone or you've just met someone and you immediately go one down, like, oh my God, they're better looking than me. Oh my God, they're more intelligent than me. Oh my God, they've got more money than me. To then having to come up to going, oh, and I'm really good at this. And then down, and then up, and then down, and then up, and then down. And it's the shame that just keeps going back and forth, rather than sitting in same as, which is what we teach in RLT.
Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying today's episode, please do subscribe or give it a follow so we can keep giving you excellent content and bringing on amazing guests that hopefully you're loving on the Health Review podcast. Now back to the show. So interesting. And I guess the way we've evolved, do you think it's all linked to survival and community and being accepted and being safe? Because I guess if you were the one that did something that threatened your safety, that, you know, leads you to have that shame feeling, or it's almost like an emotion that teaches us, right, this is what you need to do to survive, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'm sure it's kind of a driver, isn't it? To kind of, if you think about the people pleaser or the perfectionist, I will only have connection, I will only be lovable if it's perfect, if it's this. But it's so isolating. All of that, shame is inherently isolating. You were isolated when it happened. And you kind of feeds the cycle. You just keep feeding the cycle of isolation.
Wow. Shame, everyone. Like, I'm going to read this book. I feel like it's something we all need to be a bit more aware of. It's really interesting. Thank you for going through that. One of the benefits of being in a relationship is that it almost supercharges for some people these improvements that we want to make.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like you've got a mirror held up in front of you.
Absolutely.
And it's not to say if you're single you can't have these reflections, because you absolutely can.
Yeah, well, we're all in relationship all the time, whether you're in a relationship, romantic relationship or not. So we're all in relationship with one another. So absolutely, if you're single, you can do this work for sure.
I think if you're in a relationship, and potentially one that you either want to stay with for a long time, or you're already married and you made that choice, you know, it's great to like have that other person to sort of just flag some of these things, because so many of them we're doing subconsciously, and actually it's really hard to be that self-aware.
It is. And I think, and I see a lot of people do a lot of individual work and then get into relationship and think that, oh, it's going to be fine now. And of course it's not. But, you can be in a long-term relationship. It's not never fine. We constantly grow. And one of the best things that Gabor ever taught me was this idea that when someone triggers you, activates you, when you get triggered, the best thing to do is thank that person. Thank you. You just showed me where I need to do some healing. And when I got that, it was so powerful, because it really taught me that that's the only way I'm going to heal. Every time I feel that, and you're right, and I love that you use that. I use it all the time, the idea of being a mirror to each other. And Terry Real talks about our partners are designed to stick, he says, to stick the burning spear right in our eyeball. They're exquisitely designed to be the one. And that's why they are the one for us at that point in time. Maybe not forever, but that point of time, they are there to show you. And I always see that as a kind of gift, because if you can get through that bit together, if you can really, really pierce each other's wounds, and most people do, then you can start to heal together in relationship, because you're no longer alone and you're no longer children. And so there's a potential for healing. And that's the kind of magic of a relationship, really.
Yeah, the potential. It's all a bit terrifying, isn't it? But really, really exciting and beautiful, I guess, when it happens.
Totally.
My husband and I mean, we're both big into like self-improvement in all ways, love health and wellness, obviously, doing this show. But then when you try and translate that into mental health and relationships and each other, it can be really confronting when your partner says like, hello, like this is really quite worrying or concerning.
Yeah.
But I would rather be in a situation where I'm being made aware of it. There are relationships, and I think I know a few, where nothing's called out, nothing's flagged. People are in their own heads living two separate realities. And I think that's a reality I don't think I would want to be in. I quite like the sort of give me feedback and let's try and work through it. But it's painful, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I've said this before, that I am more interested in the relationships where people don't fight. Because what isn't being said is going to come out somewhere, in my experience.
I guess there are ways in which we know they might come out.
Yeah.
Betrayal is one of them.
For sure. For sure. Most of the time, I would say most of the time, betrayal happens because something isn't being addressed or spoken about in the relationship.
That's really interesting. It makes sense. How does that kind of show up? So couples are coming to you, there's been a betrayal. How do you get to the root of what caused that betrayal? Is it often the person who's perhaps had an affair? Is it their trauma sometimes? Is it something that's missing in the relationship? Can it be a bit of both?
A bit of both, for sure. I mean, the process of working through betrayal is different for everyone. It's not. I don't use a formula, because I think you have to go at the pace that the couple want to, and also you have to start with, do you want to do this work? Because it's not easy. It's really confronting. You feel like you go back over old ground over and over. The one who had the affair often wants to kind of deal with it and get out and never come back to it, and the other one wants to keep going over it. And so that's a really common pattern. It's mostly a symptom. It's not the cause. And I'm never going to say that someone is to blame for their partner having an affair. That's not what I want anyone to hear. And I really, really help people to see, how did this get to this point? How did you not talk to one another? How did you not get yourself heard? A lot of people said, well, I've said this 1,000 times. And I think one of the most confronting questions I put to people is, how did you put up with not being heard for so long? And that's a really confronting question for a lot of people, because it's true. They probably did say it 100 times. They did try and speak about it. They did try and address stuff. How did they tolerate and put up with and accept that they hadn't been heard?
It's very complex, isn't it?
Yeah, deeply, deeply.
And often it's something that someone makes you feel a certain way. For some people, there might be one part of themselves which has been quiet for a while that they miss and didn't know that they missed.
Yeah, and I think that can often touch back to that piece about shame, is that we can unconsciously shame one another very early in a relationship, not meaning to, just something is said very early or flippantly, and that kind of goes in as data, and we kind of go, I can't show that part of me, or that's not welcome here. And so slowly but surely, these little parts of ourselves get kind of compartmentalized, and that becomes intolerable for some people. And then people meet someone else, and rarely is it really about the other person, but it becomes, here's another mirror where I can show up and I can test out this part of me that I've been hiding. And so it's a sense of, I've fallen in love with someone else, but in part, I always say, you've fallen in love with a version of who you can be there, that you haven't integrated into your relationship, that you haven't brought into it. And through it's not intentional. It's just, I didn't realize how much I was kind of shutting myself down, or we fall into roles so easily. And that's the bit of the kind of unconscious piece that you were talking about earlier, about how do we unconsciously repeat those patterns. It's because we're usually in role. In a family unit, we all get given a role: the good one, the naughty one, the pain in the neck, the whatever we get given a kind of role, and then very easily we can slip into that.
It takes almost like a big detachment process. I think a lot of us will know when we see our family, it can sometimes feel like you're back to that dynamic that you don't want necessarily. And it's almost like you have to set the boundaries. You have to make such a conscious effort to start distinguishing these new kind of dynamics,
Yeah.
I guess, new flow state, because it's almost like a flow state. You just go into this rhythm that's always existed and is familiar.
Yeah.
And I guess in relationships, that's where it starts to get dangerous if there is something that you're hiding
Yeah.
or not able to experience and access, compounded over years and years. And it can take years.
Yeah.
Many people are happy for a long time, I'm guessing. And then
Yeah.
out of nowhere, these things can happen.
Well, life changes, and you'll hear, I'm sure you've heard the idea that, if one couple in a friendship group divorces, it has such an impact on other relationships, because people start showing you what is possible, showing you that they might be questioning whether they are happy, whether this is enough for them, whether they do want something else. And that is back to the mirror point. It's like people are just mirrors, and they're inviting us to look at parts of ourselves, and how much you want to look at it is up to you.
It's a lot to think about, isn't it? There are also lots of people now who are single, very independent. I know personally lots of women who have been on the apps, they've dated, it hasn't necessarily worked out with people along the way. Some of them are very defined in like, I'm just going to happily be myself and be single, and I feel very comfortable there. Others are like, still wanting to find a partner and finding it hard to accept that. And I think it's very common now. A lot more people are choosing to be single.
Yeah.
A lot of guys don't want to commit. There's all these dynamics going on. What do you think is going on in people's heads about, why is it hard to commit now, harder than it has been? Is it that we have more choice? Is it that people have more attachment issues, perhaps? Do you see kind of a running theme?
So much has changed. It's not kind of, again, we were talking just at the beginning about, before we came on here, about the kind of, when I grew up, I feel really old now, when I grew up, fitting in was really important. And being like everyone else, being like my kind of group was really important. And what I see now is being different and being your own person and being authentic and being an individual and being separate from, and is more important. And so the kind of norm, quote unquote, of kind of going through school, going through university, getting engaged, getting married, having children is kind of not what people are kind of moving towards. It's also really expensive. I'm not just talking about a wedding. Getting married is kind of like, the idea is, traditionally we put our funds together. We're kind of now going to go forward. And I think people are, what I see clinically is that people are being more, I'm going to call it intentional. They want to be kind of their authentic self. They want to have done, quote unquote, the work. They want to have lived a life. They don't want to have regrets. They want to, so I don't necessarily know that it's always about commitment. Yes, for some it is, but look at the divorce rates. Are you surprised? Most of us, I grew up with divorced parents. A lot of us grew up with divorced parents, and it's like, do I want that? And does it work? And we also know that lots of people get remarried and then divorced again. And so it's a kind of, I think there is so much, and as you put it, there is freedom of choice, there's freedom of movement, there is, women are allowed to kind of do as well as men, and we're allowed to want to do that in a way that we weren't before. We can have children in a different way now. So it's, the landscape's changed completely. So while sometimes it might be about attachment issues and commitment issues, I don't think that's the full picture.
That's reassuring, because I feel like the narrative has been that everyone's all a bit messed up now. And I mean, I'm generalizing again, but with men, like, it does seem to be quite often that the women are looking for a husband, the men don't want to commit, the men will go back on the apps and swipe away, and they've got all these hundreds of thousands of other options, so they're going to just keep going until they can't have that anymore.
Sure, but then I think that comes back to the kind of commodity of likes and the validation, and we are largely disconnected. I mean, from an RLT perspective, it really breaks my heart. Not that I'm saying everyone should get married and everyone should be in a monogamous relationship. That's not what I'm saying. But it breaks my heart because the basis of RLT is that we are stronger together than we are separately. And it's the kind of relational empowerment, whether that's a couple or a family system or, globally, humanistically, we are stronger together. And the kind of individualistic kind of model is the antithesis of what RLT is about. And so I struggle with that. And not because I make a judgment that people shouldn't do what they want to do, absolutely. But I really hope we are all connected. I work with a lot of people who are on their own, definitely want to be on their own, and then talk about loneliness a lot. And to qualify that, there are a lot of people in relationship who are lonely. So it's not a kind of always the answer.
No.
But connectivity is really, really important.
It's so important. And I think so many of us have realised this in the last few years, maybe since COVID.
Yeah.
Maybe we're talking more about other things now that I guess mental health is spoken about more. It's not just, there was a big trend between health and wellness, but now I think a lot of it's shifting to actually community connection, maybe not like doing marathons all the time, but instead doing walks with friends. And actually that can be more healthy than doing your cardio every day and things like that. So it's how do we find these connecting in a way that we evolved to connect, and we grew up, we evolved in tribes, right? And it's survival. So I guess it's a big question mark. How do you navigate that if you are spending a significant amount of time on your own? It means you probably have to put an extra effort to get out there, to see people, to have your communities and things like that, which I guess is a question. I also see some people, I don't know if you have examples of people coming to you who their standards are so high for a relationship. I have one friend, this is quite funny. I hope she won't mind me using it as an example, but she was sort of met a guy that she thought was quite nice, went on a few dates, really nice, just like really great guy, but he was just like so obsessed with salsa dancing that I found it weird and I couldn't just see past it. And I was like, how obsessed do you mean? She's like, he would train like 3 times a week or something, and like he spoke about it so much. And I was like, okay, that's really interesting. What put you off? She's like, I don't know, I just found it a bit weird. And because I'm a bit curious about these things, I was trying to find out what's the root. And actually, I think for her, it was the intensity is what she didn't like. She likes people who are a bit more sort of balanced and kind of not too one way. Yeah. And so we kind of spoke about that. But I think a lot of people have these small things where they're like, oh, that gave me the ick.
Yeah. No, I think that was the word that was coming up for me as you were talking about it. I don't know. I'd have a question about what is it about the intensity? What is it about passion? I mean, it's interesting that it's salsa as well. It's like there's a lot of passion and fire in that. And is that threatening on some level for her? I don't know. I think the kind of too much choice, I don't know about you, if I go to a restaurant and the menu's enormous, I can't decide.
Yeah.
And that's what we have now. And I think there's also data out there that talks about the kind of, there are so few men on the apps that are actually getting kind of hit rates that it's such a kind of let me go back and see if I can try again. It's an addictive model. It's, back to validation, isn't it?
It's really interesting where things are going. Also, like in the next 10, 20 years, it'll be even more interesting to see how these patterns keep changing. You've quoted I think it's on your website, A.H. Almas. It's only when compassion is present that people will allow themselves to see the truth. Why do you think that having compassion is so important when it comes to healing some of these traumas we have?
Because I think it does exactly that. It dissolves shame. It's about, there's no judgment. It's allowing. It's like, yeah, of course you responded like that. Of course that would have happened. I totally understand why you made that mean that. Is just, it opens people up. It's being seen, to use a kind of very, very common phrase. I think compassion is, you can tell someone the truth, and it can be a really hard truth. And if you tell them that with compassion and with love, which is what we teach in RLT, but also Terry Real calls it carefrontation, which is really, really lovingly telling someone that they're really not doing themselves any justice by doing what they're doing. He has this brilliant quote way of pitching RLT, Terry Real. He says, if I gave you an elevator quote, he's American, he would say, RLT is, you don't want to do that. You want to do this. Which is exactly what we do in therapy all the time. It's like, what are you doing? Like, that's not going to get you more of what you want. where did you learn to do that? And you can say that with so much love. Like, I want to know where you learned to do that, because it's not helping you get more of what you want. So I'm here to help you get more of what you want. And that's what we do quite a lot.
And once you actually find these triggers, I guess it feels like almost simple when you can see it clearly and it all starts making sense. In theory, you're like, oh, okay, I can just be aware of that and not get triggered next time. But in practice, when you feel that burning or the heat, a lot of people say it's like a heat that just raises up in your body, and it's like you cannot trigger that part of your brain which is rational.
No, you can take a time out. You can take a beat, breath, literally taking a time out, walking around the block. The minute you feel the heat, that is the flag that says, get out of here, do not respond from here. And if you see it happen in your partner, you can take a time out. You can say, you know, what you're saying when you say time out is, I love you, and if I stay here, I'm likely to say something or do something I regret. It's not about where you are, even though I see that you've just reacted. If I stay, I'm likely to now get reactive. And so I can interrupt this. And that is then a sign to the other that they've probably not been in their wise adult place. They're in that adaptive child that we talk about in RLT. And nothing good comes from there.
And what's interesting is some people hide it well. You don't have to be screaming and shouting to be in that place. Some people, especially I know some who are uber rational people. So you would never know that their mind is actually there.
They've gone to their brain, which is their safe place.
Yeah.
And now they're going to talk their way and be right. And rational.
Exactly. So you've got to try and recognize it, even if it's not a huge moment of passion, which is another skill in itself. Victoria, I've loved our conversation. I feel like I could sit here all day just asking you all of these amazing things that you've been sharing with us. You are seeing clients. You're also doing, obviously, couples. You've got people coming on their own. You do an intensive. I was reading you do a 3-day intensive with couples, which must be intense for you as well.
It is, although actually, whilst it's called an intensive, I find them kind of less intense than some weekly sessions, because your nervous systems can all start to calm over that 3 days, because you can go deep without having to interrupt it, and you don't have to go as fast. It's actually less intense than the name suggests, but it's really powerful if you're kind of in crisis, want to make a decision about anything about the relationship.
I love that. It's such a cool idea. I think if there's a couple out there listening now thinking that they've got some things to work through, give it a go, because Victoria, you're so brilliant. Thank you. Your website, where can people find you to potentially book in sessions?
So you can find me at my website, which is www.spaceinme.com or oxfordhousetherapy.com.
Thank you so much for coming on the Health Review. I've loved our conversation.
Thank you so much.